My name is Sid Britt, and welcome to the 16th Annual Savannah Book Festival. This year's festival is presented by the Philip E. and Nancy B. Beekman Foundation, David and Nancy Citron, Robert Faircloth, the Courtney Knight Gaines Foundation, and the Gerald D. and Helen M. Stevens Foundation, with a special thanks for a grant from Georgia Humanities. We are especially grateful to an anonymous donor for sponsoring the Lutheran Church of the Ascension Fellowship Hall today. We'd also like to welcome our generous sponsors and literati members. It is through your support that we are able to make festival events this Saturday free to the public. 90% of our revenues come from donors and literati members, and we thank you. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. James Rollins will be signing festival purchase copies of his book in Telfair Square immediately following this presentation. If you are planning to stay for the next author, Brendan Slocum, please move forward to fill seats as the venue empties. This assists the ushers in determining availability for his session. I'm sure by now you've all turned off your cell phones and you know that we'd ask you not to do flash photography. On the back of your program, you'll find a QR code for a survey. And I asked this last time, how many people are here from out of town? Outstanding. Please, please fill out the survey. This ensures continuous improvement and the impact of our festival has on the city of Savannah. Later, as you exit the venue, you will see our wonderful volunteers holding yellow buckets. We hope you will consider making a donation to the Savannah Book Festival. It is only through your generosity that we are able to keep Festival Saturday free. If cash is a thing of the past for you, you can donate via Venmo with the QR code on the back of your program or through our website. We will have the opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the talk. Please raise your hand and an usher will bring you a microphone. James Rollins is with us today courtesy of Tom and Margaret Morse, as well as Joe and Barb Grispo. James Rollins is the #1 New York Times best-selling of international thrillers sold to over 40 countries. His Sigma series has earned national accolades and has top charts around the world. He is also a practicing veterinarian who still spends time underground or underwater as an avid spelunker and diver. At long last, Rollins debuts a major new series that opens a world trapped between fire and ice, merging his fascination with the natural world, his love of adventure, and knowledge of the wonders found at the evolutionary fringes of scientific exploration. Please join me in welcoming James.
They gave you permission that I get. Okay, you're okay? All right, good. I hate staying behind a podium when I do a talk because I find out if I'm behind a podium, I start yelling at everybody. I don't know what it is. Some lifetime I must have been like a fiery evangelical preacher or something because, boy, I get really mean when I'm standing behind a podium, so I will avoid that if I can. You know, I'm introducing the Cradle of Ice. You probably saw the little pictures in the program, and I'm going to try to answer 2 questions today before I do the Q&A because you're going to ask this anyway, so I'm going to get it out of the way. As was released or revealed in the introduction, I wrote that, by the way. You know, that's why. All the flowing accolades, I wrote it. I don't care. I'll admit it. But I specifically put practicing veterinarian in there. Because oftentimes when I get introduced, I get as former veterinarian. And I take offense at that. I still do practice veterinary medicine. I do my continuing education. I work with a group that traps feral cats, wild cats. They bring them to the local shelter. I spend 1 Sunday a month for 8 hours spaying and neutering. And, you know, it's nice saying #1 New York Times. You know, I do it for is ulterior motives. It's self-serving entirely. You know, it's cool to be the #1 New York Times bestselling author. That's a great accolade. But my greater pride is I can still neuter a cat in under 30 seconds. And I'm willing to prove it at any moment. But I also secretly do it because I'm just waiting for somebody to go, you know, James Rollins really can't write. You know, pick up that scalpel and get back to work. So I need to keep my skill a little bit honed. So this is somewhat self-serving. But so one of the questions I'm going to answer today is how did a veterinarian become a thriller writer? It's a weird path. A lot of lawyers become writers. A lot of doctors become writers. as far as I know, I'm the only veterinarian that wandered off into thriller writing. It's a weird detour. I think it's because, lawyers hate their jobs. Veterinarians don't. We like our jobs. So it's a weird path to take. So the question often comes asked is, why? Why did you give up? And again, my mom, why? We put you through vet school. What are you doing, Jim? And I'll try to answer that first. Growing up, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. This wasn't like a second career choice. That was my first career choice. And I remember specifically in third grade, elementary school, you probably got the same assignment. Go home tonight and write a couple paragraphs about what you want to be when you grow up. And this is a point of moral dilemma for my third grade version of myself. I remember sitting at my desk, blank sheet of paper in front of me. Knew I wanted to fill out as a veterinarian. Only problem, didn't know how to spell it. I thought I could put policeman or fireman and I can go play. But the one thing that all third graders hate to do, got the dictionary, looked it up. Third grade, ready to be a veterinarian. Jump forward, and I'm in the University of Missouri, Columbia Veterinary School. I've got accepted. First day of veterinary school. The dean walks in, gives an introductory speech, welcoming us to the school. And he starts another little phrase you probably remember from school. Take out a sheet of paper, you're having your first pop quiz. It's a one-question quiz. If you get it wrong, we're kicking you out of vet school. Write down the word veterinarian. I got it right. Third grade, ready for that. But that's this side of my brain that loves animals, loves medicine, loves science. This side of my brain, a little more twisted, a little weirder. I blame this on my family. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters, so let's all do the math. My mom had 7 kids. Well, somebody with dad. Parents had 7 kids. We were raised Polish Roman Catholic. To keep the Polish flag in your window, you had to have 6 kids. So my parents had a spare. Just in case something happened, the flag could stay up there. But to me, they were my early audience, my siblings. They were my test audience for my storytelling. My goal was to terrorize my younger brothers and sisters with wild, outlandish stories. If tears were involved, all the better. I call it storytelling. My mom called it lying. Tomatoes, tomatoes. That's this side of my brain. And I read a lot growing up, and that's like throwing gasoline on this side of the brain. But it didn't seem like a career path. You can do this, this, and this, and become a successful veterinarian. You could do this, this, and this, and fail horribly as a writer. I took this other path. But I kept reading. And always in the back of my mind was, maybe one day, wouldn't it be cool, maybe to open up a magazine and see a short story of mine published, or walk into a bookstore and see a book on a shelf. That was my only goal when I began attempting to write. And if you want an answer on how that transition occurred, it's a bit of a story, but I will be here for 2 hours if I explain it all. So I began writing as a hobby. I joined a critique group and we shared stories, and I thought at this point, because I had a full-time veterinary practice that I was running, that I didn't have time to do a novel. I thought all I had time was short stories. I could fit that into my breaks in time. And so I continued to write short stories. 24 short stories I wrote. They're now all buried in my backyard. And I tried to get them published in any magazine that vaguely might be interested in that topic I was writing about, and I was soundly rejected continually, except for one time. I've asked this occasionally, just very, very rarely has somebody responded in a positive manner. Has anybody subscribed to a magazine called The Wretched Truth? It's a small press magazine. No, nobody? All right, keep that in mind. What I was writing, though, was a nonfiction blog for the local rag in support of my business. It was like, why you should give heartworm medicine to your dog, or how you can drain your dog's anal glands by yourself. That was also self-serving because I didn't want to do it. So if I could tell you to do it, then I don't have to do it. But Christmas came around, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool, instead of doing a nonfiction, I'll do a little story, a little Christmas tale, T-A-I-L, how clever. is going to be a cautionary tale on why you shouldn't buy somebody a puppy for Christmas. I did the one thing that I later learned you should not do. I killed the dog. Oh yeah, it was a tearjerker. And I thought, well, this is a cool story. Surely somebody will love this. And I began submitting it out. Sending until I got a little note from the Wretched Truth. It said, hey, we think your story's cute, tear-jerking. We'd love to publish it. We're not going to pay you. But we're going to give you free copies of the magazine as payment. And I'm thinking, okay, if there's any lawyers in the group, a barter, which this is a sale. So I'm calling this, I've sold one of my short stories. Told my critique group, told my parents, told the bagger at the checkout stand, anybody that would listen. I bought a frame. I was going to put that magazine in that frame when it arrived. So proud. Months go by. By the way, The Wretched Truth, just so you know, it's a sort of a vegan, vegetarian magazine. So this story, like a story about animal rights and why you shouldn't buy a puppy for Christmas, was appropriate for this publication. So eventually, my little envelope arrives. I've got 3 copies of the magazine. I negotiated hard. I was paid well. Not just 1 copy, 3 copies of the magazine were sent to me. And so I open up the middle envelope and I pull out the copies of the magazine. Now, the copies of the magazine were quite the fine production. They're basically mimeographed sheets of paper, folded in half, punched holed, and tied with yarn. It's framed and hanging in my office as my first sold short story. And based upon this extreme success, I was now ready to write my novel. So I had this idea for a story that was percolating at the back of my mind, that was going to take 5 or 6 characters. I was going to drop them 2 miles underneath the earth. I was going to throw in some monsters and then shake. Based on that detailed outline, I began writing my novel. I was going down that hole. It took about 8 months. Again, just working slivers of time to get that novel done. But it was eventually finished. I finished the novel, very proud. Similar with Jack here, I saw you walk in here somewhere. There's Jack back there. Similar with you, very happy to finish a novel. It's rare that someone finishes a book, so I was very excited that I finished this book. And began sending it out. And I got rejected. Unlike Jack, I got rejected. 49 different agents rejected that first novel of mine. And usually they're just form rejection letters. Dear sir or ma'am, we hate your book. Don't submit to us again. Editor. And occasionally, similar with Jack, somebody gives you a little bit of encouragement. Hey, Jim, this one character's intriguing. Too bad the rest of your novel sucks. But you can survive on that little pat on the back. And one editor was kind enough to write me a personal note. It was on, again, a form rejection letter. But he hand wrote it, this little note to me, a little bit of encouragement, just 3 words of encouragement. This is unpublishable. I had to respect that. Not only did he reject me, but he took the extra special time to kick me in the nuts besides. So, kudos. So, it takes a while to get 49 different rejections because the whole process is involved. You have to send a query letter, then a partial, then your entire manuscript. There's lag time between each of them. After 49 rejections, ingrained in your head is, this is unpublishable. I thought, well, maybe I'm not a thriller writer. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this, it's not that I'm a bad writer. I'm just not writing the correct genre. So I'll jump to something else I was reading. And growing up, I read a lot of stuff. I wasn't pigeonholed into one genre. I love mysteries. I love thrillers. I love science fiction. I love horror. I love fantasy. So whatever book sort of caught my eye, I would read it. It wasn't, particular about what I was reading. So I was also an avid fantasy reader. So I thought, well, I got this idea for fantasy. I'll start working on a fantasy novel. Because clearly, this is unpublishable when it comes to the thriller. So, began working on that while I'm collecting the rejections. It was a little insulation. Even though I'm getting these rejections, at least I'm working on a story. Now, we have to go to the springtime. It's springtime in Sacramento, and I'm halfway through this fantasy novel when that 50th agent calls me. Now, she calls me at 6 o'clock in the morning because apparently the East Coast does not know the West Coast is 3 hours earlier. There's an early call. I think it's an emergency call. So I'm a little irritated. Oh, I got to go in early. Who fed their dog chocolate? And she said, "No, I'm an agent, and I read your work, and I think I can, I think I can publish it. I can find a home for it." And I'm thinking, "You're nuts, because I've got written proof that this is unpublishable." But I'm not going to tell her that. So I thought, I'm so excited. Thank you very much. And she in turn asked me this question that all agents ask you at this point: "What are you working on now?" "Oh, I'm glad you asked. I'm about halfway through this fantasy novel. I'm really excited about it. I think it has a lot of potential." And then she made this noise. It haunts me to this day. "I hate fantasy. Stop writing that crap. Write me another thriller." And I'm thinking, I've got 49 different rejections. I can't lose this woman. So I said, of course. Clearly you're wise. I must follow whatever you tell me. I will stop writing my fantasy, and I'll write my next thriller. That was an outright lie. I had no intention of not finishing that fantasy novel for 3 reasons. Number 1, as I mentioned before, this is unpublishable. I was convinced that she was probably crazy. There's no way she was going to have any success selling this novel. But it doesn't cost me anything for her to try, so, have at it, lady. 2, I'm halfway through this novel. I can't stop writing it. Again, going back to school, remember when you were taking a test and the teacher would say, if you're stuck on a problem, skip it and come back to it. I physically cannot do that. I am not wired that way. I will stay stuck on that question until the buzzer goes off. So halfway through this novel, I cannot physically stop it. I can't do it. I have to finish this story. 3rd reason. It's the spring. I had gone ahead and already, before I ever got that call, submitted a part of that fantasy novel to a contest at a writers' conference that I was going to attend at the end of summer. Now, this is going to be my first writers' conference, so I picked the Maui Writers' Conference. I was no fool. If you're going to go to a conference, go to the Maui Writers' Conference. And so I thought, if nothing else, I'm going to just work on this fantasy until the end of the summer. I'll see how the agent does with the thriller, and I'll just see where the chips fall at that point. End of summer, she's now collected rejections for that thriller novel all through the summer. And she was kind enough to call me every time there was a rejection. "Simon & Schuster, hate your stuff. Sorry." Now, I should have been hurt with every rejection, but my response was, "Told you so. I don't care. I know it's unpublishable. This just proves it." So I fly into Maui, end of summer. Important. It's the end of summer. Now, the first day of the conference, they have a meet and greet tea where all the attendees can commingle with the speakers in a big ballroom. Now, this is a big conference. There was 600 people in this ballroom. They required, because this was one of the first years of the conference, that gentlemen wear jackets. You wear a Hawaiian shirt, but you had to wear a jacket because it's a literary event. So clearly we need, and if you had leather patches right here, all the better. I step into the ballroom, 600 people in attendance, I'm wearing a jacket. It's the end of summer in Maui. It's hot, it's humid. 600 people crammed into a ballroom. And I would swear, as soon as I walk through those doors, everybody closes into little groups and starts speaking amongst themselves, probably about me. And to me, cocktail parties are one of the 9 circles of hell. I'm very uncomfortable in that situation. I'm not a good conversationalist. I don't know how to break into conversation easily. You just sidle up to a group and, "I like dogs," and hope for the best. So I thought, I'm just going to sort of make a few circles and hopefully maybe just leave. So I'm circling, getting hotter, more nervous. I look across the crowded ballroom, and thank God, I see somebody I recognize. Now, it's not a friend, it's a friend of a friend of a friend. But trust me, that is enough of a connection. We're going to be glued at the hip for the rest of this conference. So I rush up to him, I give him a little shake of the shoulder, and, "What are you doing here?" And the gentleman turns around, and it's Ron Howard, the director. It's Opie. He turns and says, "Well, sir, I was invited." I'm like, Just checking. I just want to make sure you didn't crash our party. Now I have to slink away, tail tucked between my legs, wandering around again, this hot ballroom with a jacket that's sweating, I'm now sweating through. Now I've got to worry about Ron Howard's security. So I look across the crowded ballroom and I see somebody I recognize. This time I approach them cautiously, circle them a few times, check the name tag. And this gentleman was Terry Brooks. Terry Brooks is the international best-selling author of the Shannara series. He pronounces it different. He's wrong. It's Shannara. That's phonetically how it's spelled. He pronounces it differently. He's wrong. It's Shannara. So I said, if nothing else, at this conference, I want to shake Terry Brooks' hand and thank him for all the years of enjoyment I had reading his work. And so I did the typical, fanboy genuflection before him. May I kiss your ring, Mr. Brooks? And he looks at me, and I'm blathering on about, I read you in junior high, just remember everything about every character, and blah, blah. And then he looks at me, and he clearly is getting tired of it. He's like, yeah, buddy, I'm a fan of yours, too. I thought, I've learned something at this conference already. Terry Brooks is an asshole. And he goes, no, I read your name tag, because he's smart. I read your name tag, and I recognized your name, and I was one of the judges at this year's conference, and I read your fantasy submission, and I had my editor fly in with me because he wanted to meet you. So based upon that personal introduction from Terry Brooks, I ended up with a 3-book fantasy offer from Del Rey Books. So yay, it was a very good conference. So of course, after the meet and greet tea, I hurry up to my hotel room, and I call my agent and said, hey, I think I sold my fantasy project, but I don't know anything about publishing or contracts. Would you help me negotiate so I don't get screwed over? And her response was, of course, I love fantasy. I like that 15% engender great affection. And she goes, oh, and by the way, currently I have 2 publishing houses bidding on your thriller. So I flew into Maui unpublished, flew out of Maui with 2 different publishers, 2 different genres. Life got a little confusing for a while. So early in my career, I was doing a thriller a year and a fantasy a year. I did that for the first decade of my career. Eventually, because of hiccup in publishing, James Clemens, my pen name for my fantasy work, faded away into the background. James Rollins became more prominent. But I've always liked that early part of my career when I was doing a fantasy and a thriller, because they require 2 different skill sets as a writer, and I liked doing 2 different things. And even after I stopped writing fantasy, I was always doing 2 books a year, and it was the thriller, usually a Sigma novel, maybe a standalone, and then something else. It might have been a middle school series that I did, or it was a co-written project, a Gothic story about vampires in the Vatican. I won't explain how that gets about, but trust me, it's cool. But I had this idea for fantasy, and it came about sort of in a weird method. People ask, you brought this up before, is you get the question asked in an audience, and you will ask it if I don't answer it anyway, so I'm going to answer it. Where do you get your ideas from, Jim? Where do you get them? Where's your inspiration from? Remember that? I don't know. As Jack revealed, don't make me look. If you make me look too close at the process, it's going to evaporate and go away. But I will try to share a little bit of how that comes about. I've always got my antenna up for that next idea. I need ideas. I'm doing 2 books a year, so I need ideas. So I've subscribed at this point to 24 different magazines, some in digital, some in print. Whenever I read a bit of science that makes me go, what if? Where's that headed? I cut it out. A bit of historical mystery that maybe ends in a question mark, a piece of history that I can maybe try to play with in a novel, that cut that out and ends up in a box. I'm watching Discovery Channel, National Geographic Channel, cool locations that I can blow up in a novel. Cut that out, goes in the box. I call it my idea box, and I made a commitment a long time ago. It must stay 1 box. Because it's very easy just to keep cramming things in there, then 1 box becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, and it's like James Rollins on Hoarders. Had to stay 1 box. But to do that, I've got to keep shifting through and get rid of ideas that no longer interest me. Maybe the science is old, maybe the science is wrong, maybe the history's already been solved, so I can throw it away. So I'm constantly sifting through that pile. In that pile was an article I had ripped out of a Scientific American article. It was an article on tidally locked planets. Now what a tidally locked planet is, it's a planet that circles its sun, with one side always facing the sun, one side eternally in darkness. Our moon is a tidally locked satellite. It circles our planet with one side always facing us, one side always in darkness. I was intrigued by that, so I thought I didn't know what to do with it. Threw it in the box. Then I'm sifting through it the next month. Oh, I remember reading this article. Well, maybe I should throw it out. Well, wait a second. Could life actually exist on a tidally locked planet? All right, I got to do some investigating. I'm just curious. So again, over the many years of writing, I've accrued a great sort of battalion of scientists that are willing to talk to me about stuff. By the way, scientists are very easy to talk to as an author, mostly because their husbands and wives don't want to hear about their work. But if you show any interest in their work, they will tell you everything. So I called an astrophysicist and I said, hey, I read this article about tidally locked planets. It's really intriguing. Can life exist on a tidally locked planet? And he informed me, well, yeah, probably so, because of the thermodynamics of that planet. Some of the hot air is going to get to the cold side, cold air to the hot side. And probably in between those two extremes of ice and fire, there's probably a temperate world where people could live or life could exist. It was cool. Jotted all his notes down, threw it in the box. Month goes by again, sifting through, and pull that out again. What would life look like on such a planet of extremes? So being a veterinarian, of course, I love playing with weird animals, and I've done that throughout my Sigma series also. So I began thinking what life might look like on that planet. I called a xenobiologist. Xenobiologists are those that extrapolate what life might look like on a foreign planet. Got notes from him, jotted them down, threw them in the box. Next month, I get through that. I'm looking at that. This file is getting pretty fat. Either I've got to commit to this, or I've got to throw it out because it's taking too much room. It's also taking too much room in my brain because I found myself now dwelling on it, like what story I'm going to tell in that type of world, and what cast of characters might be going on here, but I didn't know what to do with the story until I spoke to another astrophysicist about this whole topic, and I was asking him, if a planet was turning and then stopped, and it had a moon, what would happen to the moon? He said, well, because of the rotational spin, and he gave me this whole equation, either one or two things is going to happen. Either the moon's going to drift away, or the moon's going to crash into the planet. I thought, okay, that's cool. I like that idea. So that became the idea of the Moonfall saga, this two-book fantasy. It's going to be a 4-book fantasy series, but this is the second book I'm promoting. Starless Crown is the first book. Cradle of Ice is the second. And it all basically takes place on a tidal locked planet where a young girl has a prophecy of the moon crashing and destroying all life. At the same time, this sort of area that's livable is about to break into a major war. No one wants to hear about the sky falling during such a period of time, so she's dismissed, she's vilified. Some people consider her statements to be blasphemous, so she's hunted. She begins to find other people that also believe her, alchemists that have been studying the moon, that the moon's getting a little bit incrementally bigger. That's problematic. And so it's a big basic quest on trying to figure out, A, is this truly going to happen, or am I crazy? And 2, in a medieval level of society, how do you stop the moon from crashing into the planet? And I did not want it to be like a magic wand where some magic device pushes the moon back. It needed to have a scientific basis. And even though it's a fantasy, I describe it as a scientific fantasy. Everything's based on science. The magic is based on science. Similar with my Sigma novels. I call them scientific thrillers because there's a lot of science and history in them. Even in the pages of the fantasy novel, you're going to see biological sketches, almost like you'd see in an old naturalist magazine, of some of the creatures that appear in the novel. And I did not draw them. I'm good at stick figures, that's about it. So I found a graphic artist who had a biology background and said, hey, would you work on doing these biological sketches with me? She said, I'd love to do that. Now, can you tell me what the creatures look like? I would send her like 3 sentences. Could I trust your imagination to fill in the blanks? I'm going to give you a rough idea of what the creatures look like, but you can fill out the fine details in your own head. That was not good enough for her. She was like, well, how long is the tail of that creature? I don't know. Are the claws straight or are they hooked? I don't know. Well, let's talk about that, Jim. Is these creatures tree-dwelling? Are they arboreal? Well, if so, maybe the tail's longer and prehensile, so it can grab onto branches. Maybe the claws are hooked. So by going back and forth with her, we help fine-tune the fine details so we can build the sketches that you see in the novel. So it was a great deal of fun, playing with this world, building this world. And that's basically you can guess from the title, Cradle of Ice, is these characters now are venturing into that eternally dark, frozen half of the world to complete a part of the quest. And I don't want to tell you too much. It's always hard talking about the second book of a series, because if I tell you too much, it ruins the first book of the series. So I can't tell you too much beyond that. So I'm going to not give any more information about the book beyond what I've just talked about. And I'm just going to sort of open up a Q&A, because I'm always curious why any of you are here. So hoping the Q&A will give me some hint of what's going on. Anybody have any questions? We're way at the back there. I think we have a microphone to help everybody hear. There you go. So I'm working on my 47th book. Yeah, that was my response too. Because my editor had me count.
Can you explain a bit about your writing process? Do you write every day? Do you do like a cover mock-up or have playlists, or just kind of sit and like stare at walls and things come to you? How do the stories kind of come out?
Again, maybe it's because of being a veterinarian and being fairly structured with my life and having that bit of scientific background. I'm fairly structured with my writing day, because I also have 2 deadlines per year. That also encourages me. Back when I had my clinic, I had to find a way that writing would fit in my life. And it took me a while to figure out what that was, because I didn't want to just work as a veterinarian all day, write all day, and not have any life. I wanted to have it fit comfortably. It was just a hobby at this point. And so I said, oh, okay, I'm going to do like an hour of writing a day. And then I realized if I did that, I was like checking my mail, I was checking the internet, I was researching, but I actually wasn't putting any words on paper. So that's not working. I'm going to commit to a number of words or pages. So I said, I'm going to do 3 pages a day. That's too hard. 3 double-spaced pages a day, because that's basically a page and a half. And not every day. I'll do it 5 out of 7 days of the week. And that felt comfortable. That worked for me. So then I could just start producing work and without it feeling like it was an imposition on my life. And I always thought if I get rid of the day job, I'd be much more productive. And of course I am. And I'm no longer working full-time as a veterinarian. So I do 5 double-spaced pages a day. I realized I hit a wall about then. That's my limit for the most part. Occasionally I'll do a little bit more, but it takes me about an hour for me to write a page. So 5 new pages is about 5 hours of writing. The rest of the day is research, talking to scientists, the business side of writing, and that completes my day. And I do that 5 out of 7 days of the week. Yes?
When you're prepping a new book, how do you decide when to stop the research?
That's a good question. Because I fell into that trap before. With writing Sandstorm, the sort of the prequel to the Sigma 4 series, I did a lot of research. And I had to, because the story takes place mostly in the country of Oman. And I had talked to, again, I usually have like a circle of people that are willing to tell me stuff, because I'd like to research, but I also like to have people tell me instead of me having to look it up. So I'm a little bit of a lazy researcher. Tell me so I don't have to look it up. And I had made a connection with somebody that had a stall in a souk that had an international marketplace. Said, hey, I contacted him via his website. Said, hey, I need some information about Oman, and would you help me out? I just find details I need to know. Like I learned that they celebrate Christmas in Oman. I learned that at noon every day they play classical music on every radio station because the Sultan likes classical music. So little details like that. And so I had conversations with him, and then eventually I get this note in the mail on a gilded, beautiful letterhead saying, hey, we heard that you're interested in featuring our country in your book. We'd like to invite you, all expenses paid. Signed, the Sultan of Oman. Oh, this is great. Free trip. So I was all excited about that, and then about a month later, 9/11 happened. So then I got another note, maybe not right now. So I wasn't able to get my boots on the ground for that story, so it required a lot of research. So I blame that on the fact that I was researching, and I realized I was like 6 months, I had nothing written. And so eventually I had to make a commitment to myself not to fall into that trap again. So I will research for 90 days. On the 91st day, words have to start appearing on paper. Otherwise, I'll just keep research. Not that you don't have to continue to research every single day. Like, where is the Starbucks in, Kuala Lumpur? Because if I get that wrong, somebody's going to give me a 1-star Amazon review. That's not where Starbucks is. But if I do get it right, they'll believe anything I write after that. Oh, there's telepathic marsupial creatures that live underneath Antarctica. They must be there because you got word Starbucks correct. So it's fun doing the research. Too much fun sometimes.
Hi, I do know who Terry Brooks is, but who's Veronica Chapman?
Veronica Chapman was my first editor for the fantasy series. So I told you before that I was invited by Terry Brooks to come. So Veronica was the one that was my editor for that first fantasy series. So I just wanted to acknowledge her. She basically helped me hone my talent from the early start. Because I was, by the way, this is unpublishable. They were right. It was a diamond in the rough when it did get bought by HarperCollins. My editor at HarperCollins was different from this, is a different editor because it's a different house. And she said, Jim, you have a problem with your novel. It's bloated. Well, you bought it. She says, it takes you 150 pages to get those characters down that hole. I need to get them down that hole by page 50. You need to cut 100 pages out of the front of your novel. And I'm thinking every word is, gold. How can I lose 100 pages of this golden writing that I've done? But of course, after so many rejections and this, I could not say no. I had to start trimming. So I began cutting scenes out that, look, they're down the hole by page 100. He said, no. I said page 50. All right. Trim, trim, trim. Look, they're down the page by, 85. Jim, I said 50. Change font size, move margins. Not above that. Look, they're down the page by 65. No, I said page 50. So eventually I had to cut that last little piece out, which hurt painfully. The last scene, by the way, for those that have followed the Sigma series, the last scene that got cut, the 15 pages that got cut, was a revelation how Caled, the villain of that story, obtains C4 that he uses at the end of the story. And he gets delivered to him at his hotel room by a Eurasian assassin, very beautiful woman, very deadly woman. And she belongs to a terrorist organization, and she carries a little dragon symbol on a chain, and that was Seishan. So she got cut, ended up on the cutting room floor of Subterranean, but I liked her so much that she's now in the entire Sigma series. Just to spite my editor. So I'm not giving that last part. I'm bringing that back. Yes, whoever you want to point to with a microphone.
So when you're writing a series, do you determine the whole story at the beginning, or does it come out in pieces where you have the first book, the second book, the third book, and then you haven't really figured out how you're going to end it?
That's a big question when it comes to writing. Do you outline or do you not outline? And I've gone to writing conferences where there's been panels on that very subject, where they'll have like these 3 people outline, these 3 people just write from the seat of their pants. And usually by the end of the panel, they're in a fist fight because their brains are wired so differently. I'm a little bit of Switzerland. I'm a little bit halfway between those. I do need to know the beginning and the end, whether it's a series or whether it's each individual book in the series. I need to know where each ends. And I know the tent poles are going to hold up those stories, but I do not know how A connects to B connects to C. To me, the joy of writing is that discovery between those tent poles. So that's where I find a great deal of fun. Sometimes I paint myself in the corner, like Jack mentioned in his talk, where I don't know how to get him out of that jam. It's a cool jam, and I don't want to avoid that, because if I don't know how to get him out of that jam, none of you are going to either. So it's I'll stop writing for a while until I figure out a way to get him out of that problem I just painted them into. At the back.
Thank you. As I said, I'm one of your biggest fans.
You did. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's her. That's my biggest fan right there.
You earned it.
Everybody look at her.
You earned it. I read his books 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times. I go through them and then go back through them. This is a character question.
Sure.
Joe Kowalski.
Yep.
How did you come up with having him? I know how it happened, but how did you come up with the diagnosis of multiple myeloma for him?
How did I come up with... So you're rooting things, by the way. Spoiler alert. So Joe Kowalski is a member of Sigma Force. Sigma Force, that haven't read the series, they're ex-special or former Special Forces soldiers that have been retrained in different scientific disciplines to work as field agents for DARPA, the Defense Department's Research and Development Agency. And they're basically there to protect against various global threats. Joe Kowalski first appeared in a standalone novel of mine called Ice Hunt. And I like, he's a bit of a, not the brightest bulb out there, but he was fun to write, and I missed him. So, years later, I was writing Sigma, and I recruited Joe into Sigma. He didn't belong there, but I wanted to put him in there, and I liked him. He was fun. I like doing basing a series on a group of characters and shift the spotlight around. This book deals with this, so this character's going to come forward. This book deals with Neanderthals, so Kowalski's going to be a point of view character. But also, this goes back to answer the question that you originally asked, sorry, I got a roundabout way to this, is that I resisted doing a series for the longest period of time because I was already doing a fantasy series, which is basically one long novel broken into pieces. What I had a problem with thriller series was what I call the Jessica Fletcher syndrome. Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote. Here's this old woman from Cabot Cove that's always stumbling over dead bodies. I've never stumbled over a dead body. So eventually, your suspension of disbelief becomes strained. Like, why is that woman always finding dead bodies? By the way, to me, the only resolution to that series should have been the final episode, the revelation that Jessica Fletcher was a serial killer, and that she's been framing people all along. That makes sense. Then my suspension of disbelief dissipates. The other problem with the series is it's hard to maintain jeopardy. If somebody puts a gun against Jessica Fletcher's head, as much as you want them to pull the trigger, they don't, because she's in next week's episode. So it's hard to believe she's really under threat. It's hard to maintain that jeopardy level. So I had a problem with that with series characters. Until I wrote Sandstorm, like I said, I didn't think it was going to be a spin-off into a series, but like Sigma Force that was introduced in Sandstorm, I thought I could build a series based on a group, because then the jeopardy can come from many different directions. No one's safe. Because Sigma Force can always recruit new members. So, I've annihilated many members of people, and Kowalski is a very, he's a beloved character of the series, so of course I'm going to threaten him. I'm going to give him cancer, and it's going to be very scary, and I'm going to end the book without knowing the resolution to his disease, so you have to read the next book. So it's a combination of I want to maintain jeopardy, and I want your money. So that's the reason right there. I want you to buy that next book.
What is your favorite book that you've written?
Favorite book that I've written? Yeah, I'll ask this two things. Number one is sort of a slightly different turn on that question is, what would you recommend if I've never read your books? So you should read first. And I always recommend the book Amazonia. It's a book that takes place in the Amazonian jungle, a lot of weird creatures, a lot of weird science. So if you like all that, you're going to like everything else I write. But I always have, because I like different books for different reasons. I like Tides of Fire that's coming out in August. I describe it as sort of a disaster movie in novel format. It's the most destructive novel I've ever written. Agent and my editor loved it. They think it's one of the best Sigma novels out there, so keep that in mind for those Sigma people out there. But it's always hard to answer, because they're like, what's your favorite kid? And it's always hard for me to answer that question. And so it's plagued me. And so one time I was sitting around at a writers' conference with a group of authors over drinks, and we were talking about, the Q&A, like it's going on right now, and questions that would arise that we had trouble answering. And I said, well, I have trouble answering that question. What's your favorite novel? And Lee Child was a member of that little group that we were talking amongst ourselves. And Lee is brilliant. And his answer requires you to think me speaking with a British accent, because that sounds much more intelligent, because he's British. He goes, Jim, that's an easy question to answer. Your favorite novel is whatever is the most expensive one. So yes, he's a brilliant, brilliant man. Anybody else? We have one at the back there.
You mentioned for us, two questions. One,
Sure.
Is it a literal or metaphorical shoebox of ideas?
It is a literal.
Okay.
Well, it's not a shoebox. It's a one of those lawyers' cardboard boxes, with a little cardboard lid that frays apart. So it's literally
banker's box?
It's a banker's box.
So do you begin taking things out of your banker's box, do you have characters first or plot first, the setting, or does it vary kind of by story where you're starting?
It's all of the above. You know, I wanted to set a story in the Amazon jungle, so that became Amazonia. I was in a tiny village in northern Spain. Wasn't there for research. I just like to travel for the pleasure of it. But I'm always looking, get this antenna up, looking for that idea. And so I take a bunch of photographs. I journal when I travel. I ask a lot of questions. One of the questions I always ask, if I'm in a small town especially, I'll walk up to some local and say, hey, tell me a secret about your town. And I don't know if it's because of the anonymity of that, but oftentimes they'll tell you the most amazing things. And case in point, I was a flower vendor. This old woman approached her and said, hey, you've lived here a while. Tell me a secret about your town. And I told her I was an author, I was working on stories. She says, oh, come with me. And she, hobbles away, and I'm like following her. I was like, is she gonna mug me? And she takes me to this door in this house, and down this little alley. And there's like something burned into the wooden door, a symbol. She goes, see that symbol? I said, yeah. She says, that's the symbol of the crucibulum. And I'm going, I do not know what that is, woman. She goes, that is a mark of a witch hunter. Many people think the Spanish Inquisition ended during the 12th century, but here in northern Spain, we believe that there are still sects of the Spanish Inquisition that are still in operation that are looking for witches, and that mark is an indication this is a witch hunter's home. That's cool. That became my book, Crucible. So again, it comes from many different directions, but most often it comes from sifting through that box, like I mentioned before about how the fantasy came about, is I'll end up with a piece of science in one hand and a piece of history in the other, and I don't see how those two connect until they actually physically end up in my hand together. I never would have connected them just out of the blue, either up on the floor next to each other or on the hand next to each other. And then I begin to see connections. Oh, this could make sense if it merges these two together. A little research, and they'll find out, no, I'm wrong. They don't. They can go back in the box, or it'll snowball and begin to build and build to build, similar to what I was saying with that file on the fantasy novel. And then I know that's a story I want to tell. So that's a very long answer to your question. Sorry.
I haven't read any of your books, but I will be.
I hope so. Thank you.
But the question that I have is, with your background, have you ever written a thriller where the main character is a veterinarian?
Again, just one time. The book is Altar of Eden, where it features Dr. Lorna Polk. She's a New Orleans veterinarian who stumbles into an animal smuggling ring, which casts her into a big adventure. And there's a veterinarian that appears in my last Sigma novel that came out last year, Kingdom of Bones, has a veterinarian also in it. But the weird thing is, and again, was it? I can't remember who said this. I think maybe it was Doug and Lincoln. But authors reveal a lot about themselves when they write. There's an adage, writers are naked on the page. We expose a lot more of ourselves than we think we're exposing when we write. And I thought, I don't believe that. No one can tell anything about me from my writing. Until I got an email from this gentleman, said, hey, Jim, I've been reading your books for a while now, and how come, I'm about your 8th book in, all of your main characters all of a sudden have animal sidekicks? This one has an orphan jaguar cub, this one has a wolf rescue dog, this one's a military working dog. How come? And I had to think about he's right, but why? And I realized that there's very few animals that are featured in my early novels, because I was still practicing full-time at that point. I had not given up the day job. So I was this side of my brain was being satisfied with a career. Once I stepped away and was no longer practicing full-time, this side began creeping into this side. And so you'll see a bunch of weird animals and creatures abundantly in my novels after that, including the fantasy series. I think we have a couple questions over here. I've got enough careers, ma'am. I don't need another one. It got confusing by the way, because James Rollins is not my real name, and James Clemens is not my real name. Remember, I tell Polish Roman Catholic. Neither sound like Polish Roman Catholic. If you look at the copyright page of any of my books, you'll see my real last name. The first 2 letters are C followed by a Z, and somewhere there's a J, and it ends in SKI. One of the reasons I like Kowalski. And when I sold my books, two different, fantasy and thrillers, two different publishing houses, I heard this from both publishing houses, which was insulting. Jim, we like your book, but your name has to go. We can't sell a book with your last name. We can't have somebody walking into, Barnes & Nobles and looking for the book by that Polish guy and hope that they can direct them to it. So weirdly, I heard this from both publishing houses, so they must have done a marketing study on the stickability of names. They said they choose a pseudonym, a pen name, that has 2 syllables. I heard this from both houses. And I was like, well, why 2 syllables? 1 syllable is too easy to forget. 3 syllables, too hard to remember. 2 is perfect. And I'm thinking, well, Stephen King has no problem being remembered. Lee Child has no problem being remembered. Why do I need 2 syllables? But I can't argue with them. I'm going to do it. So just so you know, Rollins came because the University of Missouri Columbia Veterinary School is on Rollins Avenue. My other pen name of the fantasy was James Clemens, and I was borrowing Mark Twain's unused real last name, Samuel Clemens. I borrowed that. They're both nods to my Missouri roots as the pen names, but I don't know if that even had. So I was 3 people for a while. I was, James Clemens, a fantasy writer, James Rollins, a thriller writer, and James Chakowski, that's how you pronounce it, the veterinarian. So schizophrenia sort of set in for a while there. It was embarrassing because I go to a book signing like, I'm James Clemens, and I'm promoting my fantasy novel. 6 months later, I'm promoting my thriller. They go, no, you're not. We saw you 6 months ago. You had a different name then. My clients became suspicious something was going on.
Yeah.
Mostly because I had posters in my lobby. Get your cat spayed, get a free book. No, that's good. What's your long-term career plans? You have a successful veterinary hospital. What's this writing business? So I'm like, I'll answer when I'm done draining your dog's anal glands. So it was confusing for a while. But now I'm just one person.
I have one more.
Of course.
Of course I do. You talk about your fantasy series. You talk about your thrillers.
Uh-huh.
How did you come to write the Indiana Jones story?
Well, thank you for asking.
Was it Hal? What's his name? Opie?
Opie. No,
Did he call
no.
you?
He's posted a restraining order against me, by the way, so. For some reason, I have a weird thing about assaulting directors. I was at Comic-Con one year. And if you go to Comic-Con, you collect a bunch of crap that you want to get rid of. And I remember, I had a pile of stuff. I'm trying to think, I need to find a trash can. And the only place they have trash cans are near the vendors where they sell the hot dogs and pretzels. There's a long line of people waiting for hot dogs and pretzels, and beyond them is the trash can, my goal. So a lot of stuff, kind of waiting for a break in the line so I can reach through them and put it in the trash can. And so a break occurs. I lunge forward as this gentleman right here steps forward, and I'm punching him in the stomach. It's Quentin Tarantino. So I punched Quentin Tarantino in the stomach. So, no, Indiana Jones. So I became known sort of as an archaeological thriller writer because a lot of my books dealt with archaeology and weird history. And for example, the review for Map of Bones, the official first book in the Sigma series, was reviewed by Publishers Weekly with this line. It's like you've crossed Dan Brown with Indiana Jones. To this day, I don't know if they were insulting me or if they were complimenting me by that comparison. I took it as a compliment. But that became what I was known for, so when they were looking for somebody to novelize the movie, they said, hey, let's see if this guy was willing to do it. So I got a call from Steven Spielberg saying, would you want to do the novelization to this project? And am I going to say no to Steven Spielberg for anything? Can I have your first child? Yes, Mr. Spielberg, here's my first child. I didn't want it. It's yours. So, and I was a big indie fan. I remember seeing Raiders for the first time. I was one of those guys that had to see the movie on the first day. So I had already circled in the calendar when Raiders of the Lost Ark was coming out, and determined to make sure it was the first showing of the first day. Well, Steven Spielberg apparently didn't like that, so he had booked a sneak preview, which they used to do once a week before. I was mad, because I had booked a whitewater rafting trip for that same weekend. I remember paddling as fast as I could to make sure I can get out of that river and make it to the show. And it was a close call. I had to go right from the river to the theater. So I was soaking wet, watching Raiders. It's not a bad way, by the way, It's like a three-dimensional, multi-sensory experience. I just feel sorry for whoever sat in the seat after I did. Like, wow, that guy really liked that movie. So when I got that call, of course I was going to do it. And again, I like doing something. I like doing, stretching my literary legs. Do a thriller a year and then something else. And so the novelization was my something else that year. So it was fun to try doing that, to expand a script into a full-length novel, which is like reverse engineering a novel. So it was a great deal of fun. You're most welcome. Thanks for coming out. Love Savannah. There's no snow here. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. I don't have to shovel for a couple days.